All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in today's KeyShot webinar. My name is Rex Roberts, and I'm the lead user experience designer for Luxion, based out of our Southern California headquarters. Also based here is our sales team, who returned from SOLIDWORKS World not too long ago with some interesting feedback that led us to hosting this webinar. So what they discovered is that some customers have had a less than ideal experience with the plugin at some time in the past, and because of that, they've since abandoned it completely, unknowingly sacrificing speed and efficiency. So today, I'll be discussing and demoing some basics and best practices so that you can leverage the KeyShot plugin for SOLIDWORKS and confidently embrace it in your design process to help speed up and smooth out your workflow. So let's jump right into it. But actually, before we begin, as always, a recording of the webinar will be available at youtube.com/KeyShot3D, where you can find many more videos, awesome learning content. So go ahead and head over there if you haven't yet. Today, I'm presenting on a Box Technologies workstation running Windows 10 Pro. I'm using SOLIDWORKS 2019, KeyShot 8 Pro, which is the most recent public version, 8.2.80, and I'm using the most recent public SOLIDWORKS plugin for KeyShot, which is version 1.1. The CPU on this box workstation is an AMD Ryzen Threadripper 1950X with 16 cores, so hyper-threaded, that's 32 threads, and 64 gigs of RAM, which that RAM helps out with the importing process and getting those higher poly scenes into KeyShot. And we have Will answering questions in the questions panel. So if you have anything that comes to mind throughout the webinar, go ahead and ask those there, and he can answer them for you on the spot, or if they're good questions, we can address those at the end. So today's webinar should be a little shorter than normal. The topic is obviously the SOLIDWORKS plugin, which is not too involved. So we're going to go over some of the basics, some of the features, and it shouldn't take too long. So first, we're going to talk about getting started with the KeyShot plugin, just installing it and the basics of that. Talk about some of the settings that come along with it. We are going to look at working with materials and a couple tips on using textures and labels. Then we're going to jump into LiveLinking, talk about some workflows for iterative design, kind of the best practices there, and similarly, best practices for working with configurations. And these are configurations that you're creating in SOLIDWORKS, not to be confused with the KeyShot configurator. And then finally, I will show you an assembly with a motion study and show you how to get that over into KeyShot Pro as an animation. So why should you use the plugin? What are the benefits? And I think the number one benefit is speed. The plugin is the fastest way to get your models from SOLIDWORKS into KeyShot. And this is because there's no intermediate file formats. So it's going directly from the native SOLIDWORKS format, solid assembly or solid part, directly to a KeyShot BIP. And what this means is it's actually the most reliable. because there's less translation of that model data, the less intermediate file formats you're using. Some other feedback we heard from the sales team is that there are customers out there maybe have had a bad experience with importing directly into KeyShot, or using the native SOLIDWORKS format, causing extra surfaces to show up or something like that. And they've since completely changed their workflow to use something like a step file. And I would say it's best to avoid that kind of workflow. Again, it's most reliable to go straight from SOLIDWORKS to KeyShot using the plugin. And if that's not available, which it should be for everyone, it's free to download, and you actually don't need KeyShot installed in order to download it. So I would recommend using the plugin as the first option, the native CAD format as the second option, and avoid those step IGES kind of third-party formats if possible. So in order to get started, it's pretty easy. Go to keyshot.com/plugins, where you can find the SOLIDWORKS plugin. Just click on the link to download that, install it with both KeyShot and SOLIDWORKS closed, and it should do all the work for you. If it does not show, you may need to enable the add-in. So you can go to the add-ins menu, which shows a window like this, and then you'll just check that box to enable it, and then check this second box here for that to be enabled on startup. And then it's going to show you a little toolbar. It may be floating, it might be docked. Once that's shown, you can click and drag it around the UI in SOLIDWORKS to position it in the location that works best for your workflow. Once you have the plugin installed, on that toolbar, you'll see 4 icons, which you can see here. The first one is called Send to KeyShot. And what that's going to do is launch a new session of KeyShot and import the model. So yeah, this is what I was referring to earlier about going directly from CAD to KeyShot, no intermediate formats, the least amount of translation. If you have an empty scene open, so if you just launched KeyShot on your own and you have untitled.bip, it'll just add to the empty scene with the send to KeyShot command. The next button is update KeyShot, and what that's going to do is update the matching source model in an open session of KeyShot. So when you click that button, it's going to search for any open sessions of KeyShot and look for that source model in the scene. And so when I say source model, that's the model with the same name in the scene tree coming from SOLIDWORKS. If no matching source model or file is found, then that model will just be added to the scene. So if you do have an existing scene with multiple models or things you've already set up, then you'll want to use the update KeyShot button, that second one, to actually add that to the scene. The first button is for a new session starting from scratch with your SOLIDWORKS model. The third option is export a BIP, and this just saves the SOLIDWORKS model as a BIP file, which is the KeyShot native format. And this allows you to output KeyShot files without having KeyShot installed. So say your engineering team doesn't actually use KeyShot, but they want to give you the SOLIDWORKS models in the most reliable format and workflow, then what they should do is export that BIP file and pass that over to the designers. And then finally, you have the export settings, which we're going to go over in a little more detail. So let's take a look at those. When you do launch the export settings dialog, it'll show you this property manager window with those settings in there. And the first option is called separate materials. And this is going to isolate link materials to each individual part in an assembly. And I have an example that I can show you to make that a little more clear of what exactly that means on the next slide, I believe. The next option is interpolate exported animations, and that's relevant when you're working with motion studies. It's enabled by default, and we recommend that you use that setting, or at least try to send over the motion study with that setting enabled first. And if it doesn't look right, then you can disable it and try again. We can talk about this a little more when we talk about motion studies. The third option is to automatically resolve components, and this relates to working with lightweight components in an assembly. And when this option is enabled, then it's automatically going to resolve those lightweight components, and that's going to give you the best results when you transfer that data over to KeyShot. The last option is include NURBS, and the main benefit of including NURBS is that you can retessellate your geometry in KeyShot after the fact. So if you're doing a macro shot or a close-up on a round surface and you need that to be perfectly smooth, you don't want to see any tessellation there, then you can include NURBS and have the ability to retessellate. But it's important to keep in mind that that does add to transfer time. So when you're working with large assemblies, I would actually recommend to disable this. And actually for now, it is not remembered when you close and reopen SOLIDWORKS. So just make sure to check those settings each time you're opening up a new session of SOLIDWORKS, just to make sure that you have those enabled correctly. So yeah, if you do find that the transfer time is taking a long time, check to see if NURBS are included, and you may want to disable those. All right, so let's talk a little bit about material preparation now. And this is the slide I was referring to earlier when I talked about the separate materials option. So you use appearance assignments in SOLIDWORKS to define material breakup in KeyShot. If you do not assign any appearances in SOLIDWORKS, you're going to get a gray, totally gray model like you see here in the screenshot. And this is the case whether separate materials is enabled or not. But there is a little extra breakup if you do have separate materials enabled. So on the left side, there were no appearances assigned in SOLIDWORKS, and separate materials was disabled. And you can see in the project materials list, there's only one material for the 3 parts in this scene, and those are all going to be linked together. So if you drag and drop a material from the library, it's going to paint up this entire trowel. Now on the right side, we have separate materials enabled. And what this is going to do is create one linked material per part. So in this case, we have 2 parts, and you can see that there are 2 different materials now in the scene that are unlinked to each other. So you can use that separate materials option to do some material breakup, but it is recommended to assign appearances and to define all that material breakup inside of SOLIDWORKS. So the plugin does respect part level appearances at the body, or the part, body, feature, and face level. So you can actually break out individual faces. They don't need to be separate bodies or parts in SOLIDWORKS. Simply just assign a different appearance or a different color to the face, and then that'll show up in KeyShot in the scene tree as a separate part. And the reason why the best practice is to define that material breakup in SOLIDWORKS is that once you start unlinking materials in KeyShot, that's where the issues occur. And I think this is kind of the feedback from customers that the sales team received, is that when they go to update their geometry, then they lose their materials, or their materials get swapped around. And I would guess that the likelihood is that they were unlinking materials inside of KeyShot, and that kind of confuses things. So yeah, the best practice is to define that material breakup in SOLIDWORKS, no unlinking inside of KeyShot. Now, linking materials is perfectly fine, but yes, avoid unlinking materials, I would say, at all costs inside of KeyShot if you want to maintain that live linking functionality. So let's take a quick jump into SOLIDWORKS and assign some appearances. So yeah, here I have my garden trowel. I have no appearances assigned. So if we go to the appearances tab, we can see it's empty. If we right click, and you can see the different options here, and it's just that default gray material assigned. So in this case, I'm going to go over to the appearances library and start assigning some materials. So if I go, maybe I'll grab a steel, matte steel for the spade. And so when you drag and drop that on, you have the choice to assign it to these different levels. And yeah, again, these levels are all respected except for the assembly level when you're using the plugin. So you could either assign it to the part, to the body, to the feature, or to the face. And in this case, I'll just assign it to the body. Then I'm going to do the same for the handle. So maybe grab a plastic mold tech, drop that on to the body, and then we have this little accent body here as well. So maybe I'll take a soft touch blue, and again assign that to the body. And then why don't I open up KeyShot? I have this little startup scene I've created with a displaced ground plane with a dirt texture there. So you can see I have an empty default model set. I have the ground in a separate model set. Model sets are a KeyShot Pro only feature. So in this case, I'll make that default model set active. And again, since I have existing geometry in my scene, I'm going to use that update functionality. If I were to use the send to KeyShot command, that's going to launch a new session to start from scratch, but I've already done some work here with this startup scene. So then if I just click update, it'll send that over. And actually, I didn't check my settings, so I probably have NURBS enabled. So I'd probably want to disable those just to speed up that transfer process a little bit. So yeah, as you can see, even with a simple model like this, the NURBS do add significantly to the transfer time. So definitely something to be aware of, to double check and make sure. I would say that those are disabled unless you really think that you'll need to retessellate inside of KeyShot. You can also do some tessellation adjustments inside of SOLIDWORKS. So if you do find that you can see the tessellation and you don't want to include the NURBS, then you can do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and cancel this and go back to my settings menu. No NURBS, check, update. There we go. Thanks for your patience there. All right, so now that we have the trowel in the scene, let's see, I'm just going to disable the depth of field here and save the camera. And then I can go ahead and make some adjustments to the position. So something like this, that's digging into the dirt there. We can assign some materials. So if I open up my library, created a favorites folder, some basic materials here, drop those onto the part. Okay, let's save that as garden trowel. And we can close that and come back to it. So I'm just going to save the trowel with the appearance assignments I've made, and let's jump back into the presentation. Yeah, so then the next little tip I wanted to talk about was regarding pattern, textures, and labels. This is something that I hear coming into support every so often. A customer has, say, a display, a product display with pattern packaging or products that they have labels or textures assigned to that they want to have patterned across all of those different packaging items. So you can assign textures inside of SOLIDWORKS, but the texture mapping is not one-to-one. So you will get some of those textures coming over into KeyShot, but you'll have to remap them just because there's different mapping techniques that are used between the two softwares. So the best practice is actually to assign all those textures and labels inside of KeyShot where you're doing your material work. And then I'm going to show you how to use the center on part option so that we can achieve the patterned textures we see in the example image here. So let me open up that file. Here. And we have these cards just have the default appearance, and then we have a blue and a red set of cards. So those will be broken up when I send that over to KeyShot. Double check that export settings, NURBS are off. Separate materials are off. If we did enable separate materials here, then each of these cards, because they're separate parts, would have unlinked separate materials. In this case, we want these three color sets to be linked between each other. So we're going to keep that setting off. Okay. And then in this case, we're going to start from scratch. So I'll use the send to KeyShot command, and that's going to launch a new session. Okay, so if we look at our materials, you can see that we have the three different materials here, and we can start with the gray ones. So let's say in this case we want to have that texture. So I'm going to drag and drop that over from my Explorer. And then, as I mentioned, use the center on part option. And what that's going to do is, map it independently for each of those parts using the settings that you've defined here. And so this, if I go to my scene tree, I can see that each one of these cards was modeled as 1 by 1 inches in SOLIDWORKS. And I know that this texture I created was 1 by 1 inch. You can see that the width and height are set to 1 by 1 inch. So pretty simple. Just had to adjust it from model to part, and now it's patterned on all of those. And it's just the same process if you were to assign that as a label. So if I go to my labels tab, I'll drag and drop that texture into here. By default, that is given a plastic material type. And then again, I'm switching that to part, center on part. And depending on what mapping type you're using, you may need to make some adjustments. So if we're using box map, should be able to just click reset and it's good to go. If you're using planar, you may need to adjust the texture a little bit. So I can show my coordinate legend, see that I want to fit that to the Z axis, and there we go. And then we can just drag and drop that or link those so they're all the same. Okay. All right, so now let's talk about live linking and iterative design. So this is really where the beauty of the plugin comes in, is the ability to make changes in SOLIDWORKS, push those changes over as updates to KeyShot, retain the transformations, so the movements you've made to the object, retain all those materials you've assigned and any animations that you've assigned. So all that work you've done is maintained, and you just simply update the design with that live linking functionality. A quick tip here is that you can select just an individual component in an assembly or a multi-selection of components before you click that update button. And that's only going to update those selected components. So you avoid wasting time checking throughout the entire assembly for updates. So a little smart tip just to save a little bit of time there. It's important to know that the update function is restricted to the active model set. Again, model sets are KeyShot Pro only features, but they do come in handy when doing iterative design or when using configurations, which we'll talk about after this. So some things that block or disrupt the live linking functionality are going to be reordering the scene tree, renaming items in the scene tree, and locking items in the scene tree. So if you perform any of those actions, it will disrupt that live linking functionality. So that's something to be aware of before you make updates if you do indeed use any of these functionalities. And then in the demo, I'm going to show you how to use the create model set from selection command to save a variation of your design so you can have multiple variations in one scene. So let's open up that garden trowel again. And I'll open up the KeyShot session I had sent it to earlier. Okay, and let's show these side by side. See if we have enough room here. All right, so we have this design into our KeyShot scene. Say we're happy with how it's set up, but maybe there's a few design changes we want to make. So I've created some favorites here in SOLIDWORKS so I can easily access some of the features that I'm going to change here. So let's say, for example, we think this thumb grip is a little too sharp. We want some softer fillets on the edge there. So in order to make those changes, obviously I'll start in SOLIDWORKS, edit that feature. So maybe this, want to double the size of that fillet. Say okay. Exit out of part mode. And then as I mentioned before, a quick tip is that you can select the component that was modified so that you're not sending the full scene over again. And then you can click that update button. And so the plugin is going to search for an open session of KeyShot, going to search for that model in the scene. And now we have a slightly softer fillet on that thumb grip there. So now let's say we like this design and we want to save it in our KeyShot scene so we can compare it to another design that we have in mind. In order to do that, I like to use model sets in order to retain the live linking functionality for each of those variations. So in this case, we're working in our default model set, and that's kind of our working model set where we're going to make the changes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save a variation by right-clicking on that model, going to create model set from selection, and the change I'm going to make is in this accent curve. So we'll call this say curved accent. We want to link the materials in case we want to make any adjustments to those. And then we can see that we're including that garden trowel. So I'll say OK. And now we've saved the curved accent variation. Now we're going to go back to the default model set. I can do that just by double clicking on default. And then I'm going to go back over to SOLIDWORKS and make some changes here. So I'm going to edit this sketch. And I'm going to remove some of these measurements. Say 0.4. Make this straight. Okay. Exit out of component mode. So now we have that straight accent, and with my default model set active, I'm going to use the update KeyShot command to send that over. So now I have the straight accent here, and I still have my curved accent saved as a separate model set, and we can continue to go through this process. So if I want to save this, I would create model set from selection, call that straight accent with the materials linked, and then we can toggle between those, render them out and compare them. Now what's great about using model sets to save these variations is that the live linking functionality is maintained. So say we wanted to make some more changes to these save variations. If I still think maybe that fillet is a little sharp, I can go in and edit that feature. We'll double it again. And then I'm going to select that component I want to update, click the update command with my straight accent model set active. And there we go. So we've softened that out a little bit. And then, yeah, we can continue working, continue to iterate on our design. And yeah, hopefully that brings a little clarity to you guys at home to understand how live linking works and how to use it for iterative design. The next topic I want to talk about is configurations, which is a very similar workflow to iterative design. So again, we're going to use model sets to save those variations of configurations. And then I just wanted to mention, if you do not have KeyShot Pro, if you're an HD user, if you rename the item in the scene tree, it's going to break that live link. So that allows you to actually save a variation in the scene without using model sets, without requiring KeyShot Pro. But I do feel that the model sets workflow is a bit more robust, and yeah, when you do rename, it breaks that live link, so you can't go back and make adjustments. You have to send the model over completely. So let's take a look at configurations. So close KeyShot and open up a different model here. We got these glasses from Sam Does Design. You may recognize these from being featured in the Render Weekly competition. Thanks to Sam for sending these over for us to demo with today. So what we have is this pair of glasses, and we just have one configuration which has an exploded view. So I'm going to go ahead and send the glasses over to KeyShot, starting from scratch in a new scene. And we can do some basic material application. Again, I've created a favorites folder with a few materials here. Okay. And now if we, let's see, open up our model set sidebar, we can then go ahead and save this by using that create model set from selection command. And this is the collapsed version of the glasses, the materials linked. Okay, so now we have that saved. We're going to go back to the default model set, jump back over to SOLIDWORKS, explode our view to enable that second configuration we have. And then we are going to use the update command. So now there we go. We have our exploded view still in our default model set, and we have our collapsed view. So yeah, again, we can save these variations by using that create model set from selection command, exploded, and save that. So now we have each of those, and if we had more configurations in the scene, we can continue to go through that same process to push those over and to save them while retaining all the materials and things that you've already set up. Okay. And then the last topic for today is working with motion studies. So basic motion and animation can be sent to KeyShot as animations. And supported features include part and model transformation. You can also use the exploded views as motion studies if you have those set up in your scene. When you have a motion study tab active, you will just be prompted to output animations when sending those over to KeyShot. So it's pretty straightforward. And then this last point here is that if you do notice the motion study looks a little funny or incorrect in KeyShot, then try disabling that interpolate exported animation settings, or try increasing the frames per second in the motion study settings. So that's just going to smooth it out a little bit. So yeah, let's jump over to a motion study and see what that would look like. That's the gripper. Close this session of KeyShot. Okay, so we have this gripper, And if we go over to the motion study tab, we can see that there's a little animation here, a little motor. And then if we go up to the settings, see interpolate, exported animations are enabled. Looks good. And then when we click the send to KeyShot button with that motion study tab active, it's going to prompt you to output animations. So we'll say yes. And then it's going to go through the motion study, collect the animations, and bring those into KeyShot. So if we show our animation timeline and play that, we can see we get the same animation that was created there in SOLIDWORKS. And then you can continue to add to animations. So if you, say, wanted to also add some camera animations here, we could do that. Maybe an orbit that goes along with the animation, so you can combine, once you have that motion study in KeyShot, you can combine it with other animations that you add here. Excellent. So that's it as far as the presentation and demo goes. So I'd like to open it up for Q&A and yeah, hear what you guys have to say. Will?
Super cool, Rex. Thanks for your in-depth demo. I think that quite a few of our questions were answered by what you showed. There were a couple. I know one customer was asking for a little bit more of an in-depth understanding of how somebody might manage custom appearances. So it sounds like they're using SOLIDWORKS a lot to manage the way their parts and materials look. And they said specifically they have color mapping and other specifics being changed in SOLIDWORKS, wondering how they can actively and always be matched to a KeyShot material. Immediately my mind went to material templates, but I don't know if you have any other recommendations that may be similar.
Yeah, I think material templates sounds like it'd be the way to go if you're managing a custom library of materials inside or appearances inside of SOLIDWORKS. The most efficient process would actually be to have a matching library of materials in KeyShot with the same names, and you'll be able to match those up. So there's actually a function with in the import dialog of the native SOLIDWORKS import that allows you to automatically assign materials from the library. But yeah, it would reference the appearance names in SOLIDWORKS and those in KeyShot and try to match them up. But that does require you to use the direct importer. It's certainly something we can look into adding to the plugin. So for now, in order to have the most efficiency in your workflow, I would suggest having material templates that match up that SOLIDWORKS appearance library with your KeyShot materials library.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I definitely think that may be a good idea to see if that's a function we may be able to add to the plugin as well. I know we had one other question that I wanted to bring up, which was, I missed it because I was answering a question of somebody else's. The person asked, when you, Rex, updated the final fillet on the thumb indent on that trowel, did it update all the model sets or just the default one that you were in?
No, it will only update the model set that is active. So that's something important to be aware of, is just making sure the correct model set is active that you want to be updated. So yeah, when you do use that update command, it is restricted to the model set that is active. So any inactive model set will not be affected by those changes.
Cool. And then I think this kind of piggybacks on that. I think there's just a few, I think a lot of people had a few questions on just the specifics of updating. Another question was, is updating a single component within a SOLIDWORKS assembly the same as, they said a model file, I think they mean model set, so the whole assembly doesn't try to re-import?
Not entirely sure I'm following. If you don't select a component and you click the update button, then it's going to update the entire assembly, even if there weren't changes to other parts. So it's a little more efficient just to make the selection of items that or of components that you want to update. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. Yeah, I think that brings a lot of clarity to it. I think those are the ones that I had that stood out. I think most of the other incoming questions were not specifically related to the SOLIDWORKS plugin, and I think those were answered. So unless anyone else has anything, any other questions related to the SOLIDWORKS plugin, I think that's pretty good.
Cool. Actually, there is one thing that came to mind for me when kind of working in iterative design, and you're actually saving variations of SOLIDWORKS files. If you do want to retain the live linking functionality, then the name of the SOLIDWORKS file must be the same. So in that case, what I would recommend is actually using folders to define the variations. So for example, we have the garden trowel here, and it's the plugin is going to look for this specific name. So if you were to make a variation in SOLIDWORKS and call this garden trowel 2, but you have this particular one in KeyShot, the live linking is not going to match. So what I would recommend doing is actually then like having a new folder for the garden trowel 2 and keeping the same name of the assembly file in there. And that'll allow you to maintain that live linking functionality. But yeah, other than that, that's it. So thank you all for joining us today. Don't miss out on next month's webinar that I'll be presenting in collaboration with the folks from X-Rite and Pantone, in which we'll be discussing the process of going from physical material samples to accurate digital representations for rendering in KeyShot using the X-Rite technology and their material scanner. So that should be a good one. If you're hungry for more learning content, head over to youtube.com/KeyShot3D. And while you're there, go ahead and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you're notified whenever we post new video content and when we post a recording of this webinar for you to reference later. All right, enjoy your day and happy rendering.